During our junior year, I crossed paths with Cindy. She was working on degrees in education and business administration, and I was studying for an engineering degree, hoping to be the first in my family to graduate from college. Her dream was to follow her parents' footsteps in education. Inspired by them, she believed in learning something new every day. This philosophy resonated with me, as my parents, who ran a small farm, also emphasized the importance of learning and self-sufficiency. To fund my education, I worked at a local tutoring service, reducing my need for student loans. Midway through the semester, our professor assigned us to groups. Initially, I dreaded the project, but my attitude changed when Cindy was placed in my group. In our political science class, we had to analyze a famous Supreme Court case given by the professor. We needed to explain the case, discuss the decision, and argue whether it was a good decision. We were assigned Marbury versus Madison, the first major Supreme Court case that had significant effects. The ruling limited the Supreme Court's power to prevent it from becoming more influential than the other branches of government. This decision shaped the Supreme Court as we know it today. So we got along so well that we started dating and became exclusive. I hadn't dated much before due to a lack of money, but Cindy didn't mind. She enjoyed simple activities like watching TV with me or taking walks. Picnics and museum visits were big dates for us. I fell deeply in love with Cindy, and she seemed just as in love with me. We got married right after graduation. For the first 5 years of our marriage, life was mostly wonderful. Our bed life was satisfying, and our small new house was perfect for us. Since we lived in a new neighborhood, we quickly made a lot of friends and had a vibrant social life. Cindy started working as an 8th-grade teacher at a middle school in northern Palm Beach County, and I got a job with a big engineering firm in South Florida. However, over time, I realized that I didn't enjoy engineering. As the junior engineer, I was stuck with all the boring tasks. To escape the monotony at work, I decided to pursue a master's degree, hoping it would lead to a pay raise and more interesting projects. Instead, I only received a $500 bonus. Disappointed, I thought, forget them, and decided to go for a PhD. Despite my job being dull, things were generally good. Cindy's career was flourishing, and we were deeply in love. Financially, we were comfortable, and we talked about starting a family. But, as the saying goes, all good things must end. The first piece of bad news came when my boss told me I was being moved from design work to inspections. Inspections were even more tedious than the design work I had been doing. The second piece of news, which seemed good at the time, was that Cindy was moving to a new position as the head of the guidance department at West Jupiter High School. This promotion would later turn out to be a big mistake. The third big issue in my life came when Brock Turner was appointed as the principal at Cindy's school. He was a former NFL player who had played for 5 seasons with 3 different teams. Brock was drafted by Dallas in the 3rd round as an inside linebacker, but was traded after 2 seasons, even though he had performed well. He spent 2 years in Seattle before being traded to Philadelphia, where he had another strong season but ended his career after a serious ankle injury in a playoff game. After realizing his football career was over, Brock tried working in TV due to his natural charisma, but it didn't work out. His charm came off as arrogance on screen, leading to him being let go. He then worked at a regional bank in customer service, but quit after 9 months because he disliked office work. Brock eventually became a gym teacher and football coach at a suburban high school in Philadelphia. Over 3 years, he moved up to assistant principal and head football coach. The team had a winning record, but never succeeded in the postseason. When the principal at Cindy's school retired, Brock applied for the position and got the job. For the first year, I talked about Brock more than Cindy did. I was impressed because he was a former NFL player, but my opinion changed when I met him. I found him to be self-absorbed and arrogant. In contrast, his wife April was charming, smart, and a bit shy. She was also stunning, like a smaller, more beautiful version of Whitney Houston. I couldn't understand why she was with Brock, but most of the school staff, including Cindy, were fascinated by him. I tried to hint to Cindy that her boss was a womanizer, but she just laughed and said I was jealous. I decided to be honest. Yes, I admit I'm a bit jealous. He's taller and more fit than I am, plus he was a pro football player. Cindy hugged me and said, "You don't need to be jealous. He's only a few inches taller and you're in great shape yourself. So what if he played football? I chose you." Her reassurance calmed me and we moved on. Even though I felt uneasy around Brock, Cindy kept dragging me to every school event, where we always ended up sitting with Brock and his wife, April. I got to chat with April occasionally at these events and found out that she and Brock had been married for 3 years and had a little girl named Tiffany. One night at the school district's Christmas party, I saw what a real jerk Brock was. If Cindy thought I was jealous, it was nothing compared to how April was treated by Brock. At the party, Brock asked Cindy to dance without even checking with me first. I thought this was rude, and I was annoyed that Cindy didn't even look to see if I was okay with it. I watched for a while and saw that Brock was holding Cindy at a respectful distance. I moved over to talk to April, and we had a great conversation. I found out she was a part-time professor at a local community college that had recently become a 4-year college. She taught French and German. Her mother's family had moved from the Congo to France, and her father was German. Before April was born, her parents had moved to the United States. Since the college had only recently become a 4-year institution, they were still filling teaching positions. April hoped that her part-time job would lead to a full-time role as an associate professor. During our chat, she showed me photos of their daughter, who looked just like a smaller version of April. I laughed as April recounted various adorable things Tiffany had done. When the third song ended, Brock and Cindy came back to the table. Brock seemed irritated to see me talking to his wife. "You're sitting in my seat," he said harshly. I was taken aback by his tone, but apologized and moved. I then offered to get drinks for everyone. April asked for another glass of Chardonnay, and Cindy wanted a Coke. On my way back, Brock grabbed my arm, took the wine glass from me, and threatened, "Stay away from my wife, or I'll knock you out." "What's your problem?" I asked, shocked by his aggression. "Just stay away from my wife," he replied as he walked away. Shortly after, Brock announced that he and April were leaving. His sudden departure was surprising, and Cindy's angry glare was equally shocking. On the way home, Cindy confronted me. "What did you do to upset Brock?" "I didn't do anything," I shot back. "You must have done something because he was really mad at you," Cindy insisted. "He threatened to beat me up if I didn't stay away from his wife. I was just being polite while you were dancing without even checking if I was okay with it." "What does that mean?" Cindy demanded. "Forget it," I snapped. "I don't want to discuss Brock anymore." After the Christmas party, my feelings about Brock shifted from discomfort to outright dislike. However, I didn't want to cause trouble since he was Cindy's boss. Luckily, after that Christmas event, Cindy rarely brought up Brock. A few months into the new year, the economy took a serious downturn, hitting the real estate markets hard. At first, my company was unaffected because we had plenty of work lined up. But as time went on and no new projects came in, people started getting anxious. I kept my head down and worked diligently. But I knew that if the economy didn't improve, layoffs might be on the horizon. One day, Cindy came home thrilled because she had been chosen to organize a career assembly at her school. I didn't understand why she was so excited, since I thought the students would only be interested in the fact that they got out of class for a few periods. Nonetheless, I supported her enthusiasm. If I had known she was so excited because Brock had picked her for the task, I might have been less eager to help. As it turned out, I was glad I did. She had already lined up an accountant, a lawyer, a nurse, a computer programmer, and several other professionals to speak. Cindy asked if I could arrange for an engineer from my company to give a short talk. I asked my boss the next day, and he approved it with the condition that I take a personal day. Since it was for Cindy, I agreed. The career assembly was planned to last 2 hours, with 12 different professionals each speaking for 10 minutes. However, on career day, 4 of the speakers either canceled or didn't show up. Cindy was frantic and almost in tears. I assured her not to worry and stepped in to cover for the missing accountant, lawyer, auto mechanic, and doctor. When it was my turn to speak, I gave Cindy a kiss and told her not to worry. As I walked up the stairs to the stage, I noticed a bunch of high school students looking extremely bored. The only reason they hadn't left yet was that they'd have to return to class. While my slides were being set up, I began my presentation. "Good afternoon, everyone. If you're asleep, please raise your hands." Naturally, almost every hand went up, and the students laughed. I had their attention now. "I hope you find my talk interesting. And if not, at least it'll keep you out of class for a bit longer." The students cheered. Taking a deep breath, I started. "I'm an engineer, but today I'll talk about a few different professions. I'll also give you some solid advice on how to succeed in whatever you do, including how to get through high school with less stress." Many students laughed at that, but they sat up straighter. I was really getting into it. I kicked off with a joke about engineers. "You might think engineers are just a bunch of nerds, but that's not true. Let me share a story to show how practical engineers can be," I continued. One day, an engineering student was riding a shiny new bike across campus. He ran into a fellow engineer who said, "Wow, that's a great bike. Where did you get it?" The first student replied, "You won't believe it. A girl rode up to me, took off all her clothes, and said I could have anything I wanted." The other engineer said, "That's fantastic. Good choice. Her clothes probably wouldn't have fit you anyway." Then I concluded, "See, Engineers are very practical. That got a big laugh from the crowd. I moved to a slide presentation showing various buildings and structures. One slide featured a carpet museum with a roof that looked like a rolled-up carpet. Another slide showed the crooked house, which seemed to be leaning in different directions. I also showed a building designed to look like a huge picnic basket. I ended the slideshow with a plain 9-story building and asked if anyone could guess what was special about it. After several guesses, I revealed, "You'll never guess it. This is Europe's largest brothel. It's 9 stories high and located in Germany. If you're interested." The boys cheered while the girls reacted with "ew." Next, I switched topics to discuss different professions, covering average salaries and the education required for each job. I included more jokes and gave tips on studying and taking tests. I shared my belief that to succeed in anything, you should always aim to do better than your best. It might seem counterintuitive, but I explained that if you don't push yourself to improve, you won't get better. I also emphasized that there's no such thing as a dumb question and that asking for help is smart, unlike those who don't seek assistance. Finally, I talked about people who choose not to go to college, but instead work in trades. I encouraged those interested in this path, explaining that they might earn more than many college graduates. I was having a great time and didn't realize I had gone over my allotted time until Cindy signaled me to wrap it up. After acknowledging her, I finished my talk with one last piece of advice. At some point, everyone has to give a public speech. It's one of the biggest fears people have, sometimes even more than dying. Most of you will face this challenge eventually. When that happens, remember to stand up straight so everyone can see you. Speak clearly so everyone can hear you. Then keep your speech brief and sit down quickly so people will appreciate it. Thank you. You've been wonderful. I received a standing ovation, a kiss from Cindy, and a handshake from Brock. But that wasn't all. Unknown to me, 3 other high school principals were there and asked me to speak at their schools. I mentioned that I had taken a personal day off to give the talk for Cindy, but eventually Cindy persuaded me to do the speeches at the other schools. All 3 speeches went really well. At the last one, at a high school in a poorer area, the principal said he wished I could be one of their teachers. I felt on top of the world, but soon, things took a turn for the worse. One Monday morning, I was called into my boss's office and told that I was being laid off. The severance package was reasonable. It included 3 months' pay and health insurance coverage. When I got home and told Cindy about the layoff, her first reaction was, "Oh, great. How are we going to pay the mortgage now?" I just looked at her and said, "Thanks for the support." Then I grabbed a beer from the fridge and went to our den, which we used as an office. I turned on the computer and started job hunting. A few minutes later, Cindy came in quietly and apologized, saying she was just worried about losing the house. I kissed her and gave her a hug. "Don't worry, the company gave me 3 months severance pay. I'm sure I'll find something before then." However, as the severance pay started to run out and I still couldn't find a job, Cindy's pressure to find employment increased. Each day, the tension in our home grew as I faced rejection after rejection. I was starting to feel like a failure. Then, something happened that made me feel even worse. Alan Latter, the vice principal at West Jupiter High School, left for a new job in California. Brock quickly promoted Cindy to take his place. From then on, I had to hear about how much everyone loved Mr. Turner, how great the teachers thought he was, and how he was being considered for the deputy superintendent role. My dislike for Brock Turner reached new heights. As I remained unemployed for a 4th month, I felt like Cindy was losing respect for me. Then an unexpected opportunity came up. On the evening news, there was a story about a new program designed to attract teachers to schools in low-income areas. The program was considering life experience in place of a teaching certificate, but if hired, a certificate would be required within 2 years. The starting pay was $3,000 higher than the usual salary for a first-year teacher. Since I hadn't found a job in my field, I decided to apply. I faxed my resume to the school board the next morning, and by early afternoon, I had an interview scheduled for the next day. I didn't tell Cindy because I didn't want to raise her hopes. The interview ended with a job offer. I didn't realize it at the time, but as soon as my resume appeared on the HR computer screen, they did a quick search on my name. They found a video of one of my career talks, which fast-tracked my hiring process. They offered me a position at Riviera High School, the lowest-ranked school in the county, located in Riviera Beach. Despite the fancy-sounding name, the area has been struggling for years. Riviera High School had the worst scores of all the high schools in the county, with only 6% of students being college-ready after graduation. Nonetheless, I accepted the job to teach math and science. When Cindy came home that night, I eagerly shared the news about my new job, expecting her to be happy and supportive. Instead, she looked horrified and said she didn't want me to take the job because it was too dangerous. She told me about some of the terrible things happening at the school, like metal detectors at every entrance and security guards patrolling the hallways. Last year, 3 teachers were attacked, and 1 was stabbed. Cindy also reminded me that I had no teaching experience and didn't think I'd last a week. After talking to several people and hearing even more alarming stories, I was very nervous on my first day. The school's appearance didn't help. The building was old and poorly maintained. There was graffiti on the front of the school and even more inside. Students ran through the hallways like they owned them, and there were guards stationed everywhere, including outside the bathrooms. I had many ideas for my lessons, but I decided to hold off and observe the environment first. Instead of diving into my lesson plan, I used math and science games. These games were fun and simple, and without the students knowing, they were actually teaching them some of the material they needed to learn for the end-of-year tests. The new principal at the school, Ben Carlson, was very no-nonsense. Being a tall, 240-pound black man who didn't put up with any nonsense made him a great choice for the job. The students quickly learned it was a bad idea to cross him. He was a strong believer in strict discipline, which I supported. I especially liked his approach of removing all gang members from regular classes and placing them in a separate class with rotating teachers and 3 security guards. Any gang members who misbehaved were given 1 warning and then expelled. By the 3rd week, the most troublesome gang members were either expelled or had left on their own. It may sound tough, but some students are beyond help. My wife underestimated my ability to stick with the job. Not only did I get through the first week, but by December, I was thriving. I revamped my lesson plans to include a new set of games, and the students responded really well. Other teachers started using some of my ideas, and they seemed to be working. By the end of the year, Riviera High School had improved from 58th to 51st place academically, and I was nominated for Teacher of the Year. Although I didn't win, being nominated was an honor. I was a bit frustrated that Cindy didn't seem impressed with my work. She kept asking when I would stop wasting time and go back to engineering. I eventually told her that I wasn't going back to engineering because I loved teaching. She wasn't thrilled with my choice, but seemed to accept it. During the Christmas break, I decided to finally pursue the PhD I had put off due to the economic downturn. I wasn't particularly interested in mechanical engineering, but I was very interested in computers, so I chose to go for a PhD in computer engineering. I knew from my last chat with April almost a year ago that she was working on her PhD in comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University, FAU. I looked into the PhD programs at FAU and decided to enroll there for my computer engineering PhD. I spent another year working at Riviera Beach High School, where our academic rankings improved from 51st to 46th place. During that time, the school board promoted Cindy to vice principal at West Jupiter High School. But everything shifted that summer. In the midst of our lives moving forward, I received some good news. Brock was promoted to deputy superintendent, and Cindy was nominated to become the new principal of West Jupiter High School. Although I still didn't trust Brock, I was relieved that his new role meant he would be working at the district headquarters. Cindy wasn't seeing him every day, but she still had to visit the headquarters once a week. I was initially unhappy about this, but I learned it was typical for new principals. I continued taking classes at FAU, which was about a 40-minute drive away. Since April was also working on her PhD there, I suggested we carpool. April liked the idea, but when she mentioned it to Brock, he was furious. He called me right away and threatened to beat me up. I expected he wouldn't approve of the carpooling, but I didn't anticipate such extreme hostility. I was disappointed because I enjoyed talking to April, and carpooling would have made the drive more pleasant. Despite this, April and I often met for coffee during our class breaks. Sometimes others joined us, but often it was just the 2 of us. At first, we only made small talk, but over time we discussed a wide range of topics. Despite Brock's jealousy, April and I became close friends. She even suggested I apply for a job at the new 4-year college. I appreciated the suggestion, but explained that I was being considered for the head guidance position at a new high school. During our coffee chats, I discovered some details about April and Brock. I learned that April had graduated with top honors from Stanford before moving back to her parents' home in Philadelphia. She met Brock at a charity event and didn't like him at first. But Brock was persistent, and eventually, they started dating. It wasn't long before April fell deeply in love with him. From the way Brock made sure to keep other men away from April, it was clear he was totally devoted to her. About a year after their marriage, they had Tiffany. April did mention that Brock didn't spend much time with their daughter and had little patience with her. He had been hoping for a son. You've got to be kidding, I laughed. Tiffany is such a sweet little girl. If Cindy and I have a daughter, I hope she's just like Tiffany. Thank you, April said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. One evening during class, our teacher started feeling ill and had to leave. I could have left about 20 minutes earlier, but I chose to stay and have coffee with April. I was already in the cafeteria when April arrived with some of her classmates. I lifted the cup of coffee I had bought for her, and she came over to where I was sitting while her classmates went to get their own drinks. You didn't have to do that, Todd, she said with a smile. It was no trouble, I smiled back. I had been here for about 15 minutes. When I went back for a second cup, I realized your class would be on break soon, so really it was no big deal. Did your class end early? April asked as she sipped her coffee. Yeah, the teacher got sick. April was quiet for a moment before she said softly, I envy you, Todd. I should be further along with my studies, but Brock hasn't made it easy. Now he's pressuring me to have another baby, hoping for a boy. But if I do that, it'll delay my PhD by years and ruin my chances of becoming an associate professor. So I told him I wouldn't consider having another child until I finish my PhD. He wasn't happy about it. April took her cell phone out of her purse and said quietly, Shoot. Is something wrong? I asked. I need to let Brock know that I have to stay late for a meeting with my advisor, but my phone's dead. Can I use yours? Sure, but do you think that's a good idea? April thought for a moment and then agreed. You're right. No point in making things worse. Amy, can I borrow your phone for a minute? April quickly dialed Brock's number and I heard her say, shoot again. Another issue? I asked. Yes, April replied with frustration. I told Brock his voicemail was full 2 days ago and he still hasn't cleared it. Can you do me a favor, Todd? Of course. What do you need? April rummaged through her backpack, found a piece of paper and an envelope, and wrote a quick note. She sealed it in the envelope. Can you drop this off at my house on your way home? Won't Brock be upset? Just tell him I tried to reach him, but his voicemail is still full. So I caught you just as you were leaving and asked you to drop off this note. I don't want him coming down here because I'm running late. Even though I wasn't thrilled about delivering the note, I agreed. I figured he wouldn't be too upset since I was just passing along a message from his wife. Still, I couldn't shake the old saying about harming the messenger from my mind and ended up laughing at myself. As I turned onto Turner Street, my unease shifted to confusion when I saw my wife's VW parked in Brock's driveway. I couldn't figure out why Cindy would be at Brock's house at this time of night. I parked on the street, trying to understand why Cindy was there. I tried to think of a reasonable explanation, but nothing came to mind. Feeling uneasy, I decided to check around the house. The lights were on downstairs, and most of the window blinds were up. I quietly moved to the side of the house. Since I had never been to Brock's place before, I didn't know what to expect. The first window I looked through was the living room, the second was the kitchen, and the third was the dining room. When I went around to the back of the house, I noticed that the shades in the fourth room were mostly down. However, 2 shades were partially up, and 1 window was slightly open. What I saw next shocked me. Brock was sitting completely without clothes in a straight-back chair. He was in the process of putting on a protection. He had a large, about 8 inches long, and fairly thick. Just then, Cindy appeared. I managed to pull out my phone and start recording. Cindy giggled. I can't believe how big it is. The first time I saw it, I didn't think it would fit, but now all I can think about is having you inside me. Brock growled. Come here, and let me put it in you. Cindy moaned and said, I wish you wouldn't use a protection. I want you to finish inside me so I can have a baby for you. I felt sick, but what happened next was even worse. Brock said, Let's go upstairs. We have time for one more before April gets back. That witch asked, When can we be together all the time? Soon, Brock replied. I need to get my finances sorted first. I don't want April to take everything. Cindy laughed and went upstairs with Brock following her. I stumbled back to my car, drove to the nearest parking lot, and broke down crying. I couldn't believe Cindy had betrayed me like this. We had been discussing starting a family, and now she was hoping her lover would get her pregnant. After the initial shock wore off, my anger grew more intense than I'd ever felt before. It was clear that my marriage was over, and the only thing on my mind was how much pain I could cause both of them. I had the video, but I wasn't sure if it would hurt them much if they were truly in love. I was unsure of how to get revenge, But my thoughts of retaliation were soon pushed aside by thoughts of April. Brock had mentioned he was planning to leave his wife with almost nothing, so I needed to warn her. I drove back to FAU as quickly as possible, overwhelmed with rage and tears. Even though I arrived quickly, I worried April might already be gone. I was relieved to see her car among the many parked there. April came out about 10 minutes later, and I met her outside. She immediately noticed how upset I was and looked worried. "Is something wrong?" she asked, clearly concerned. "Has something happened to Brock or Tiffany?" I shook my head. "As far as I know, they're both okay physically, but I have some very painful news to share. Your husband and my wife are having an affair." "That's not funny, Todd," April said sharply. "I know you don't like my husband, but I won't accept you making up stories about him." I wish it weren't true, and I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen them and recorded it. April dropped her book bag and purse, starting to tremble. I picked up her things and said, "We need to talk. It will be hard to see, but you need to know that this is real and I'm not lying." I led her to the passenger seat of my car, started the video, and handed her my phone. April began crying uncontrollably even before the video was over. I took the phone back and knelt down to be at her eye level. "I know this is all happening so suddenly," I said sympathetically, "and you haven't had time to process it. But I've already decided to divorce Cindy. From what Brock said in the video, he's planning to hide his money before divorcing you." "I didn't catch that," April said, looking puzzled. So I played the video again. After seeing it a second time, April was no longer in shock. She was livid. I had heard rumors about Brock before and during our marriage, but I didn't believe them. But if he thinks he can run off with your wife and leave me with nothing, he's in for a surprise. April realized what she had said and apologized. "I'm sorry for calling your wife that. Don't worry about it. You're just speaking the truth." After making sure April was okay to drive home and sending her a copy of the video of Cindy and Brock, I went home. When I got home, Cindy was either already asleep or pretending to be. I didn't care which. I went to our office, turned on the computer, and started planning the end of my marriage. The next morning, after Cindy left around 8:30 a.m., I showered and got ready to handle our finances. Before leaving, I found a divorce lawyer online and scheduled an appointment for the next day. Cindy and I didn't have many assets. Our house had little equity, so it would either be sold or Cindy could buy me out. We had joint checking, savings, and investment accounts totaling about $75,000. Cindy had a retirement account with the Florida retirement system, and I had a 401k account until I recently switched to the FRS. Our retirement accounts were about the same amount. I thought dividing our assets would be straightforward. However, I needed to wait until I spoke with the lawyer to understand my exact situation. I knew Florida was a no-fault divorce state, so the video wouldn't help in court, but it might make Cindy agree to the divorce if she was planning to resist. By 10 a.m., I had sorted out everything I could, so I started looking for a small apartment. I found a one-room efficiency in Lake Park and rented it. Then I went home and began packing my things. By around 2 p.m., I realized my new apartment wouldn't be big enough, so I also rented a self-storage unit nearby. If Cindy noticed anything missing, she didn't mention it. I stayed in the den, preparing for a possible new job offer. I slept on the couch there, and Cindy left before I woke up. The next day, I met with my divorce lawyer, Alicia Smithson. She was a no-nonsense, middle-aged woman. After I showed her the video and explained what Cindy had been doing, she told me the video wouldn't help in the divorce. She also warned me against posting it online, as I could face legal consequences. That night, I waited for Cindy to come home so I could confront her. She arrived around 9 p.m. and walked past me in the living room. "Cindy, we need to talk," I called out. "I'm tired and need to shower," Cindy said, heading for the stairs. "I don't care if you have Brock's mess on you," I retorted. "We need to talk now." Cindy stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turned around and asked, "What are you talking about?" "Come in here and I'll explain," I said, standing up. Cindy cautiously walked into the living room. "I think you owe me an apology for the way you just spoke to me." "I don't think so," I said, as I opened my laptop and played the video. The screen quickly showed Cindy getting on top of Brock. Cindy glanced at the video for a moment before closing the laptop. "Now that you've found out, I guess I don't need to hide it anymore," Cindy said, showing no remorse. I laughed. "Cindy, remember when you said people should learn something new every day?" "Yes, so what?" she snapped. "Well, it seems you didn't learn when I warned you that Brock was a womanizer. Now, he's turned you into his mistress." "There's no need to be rude," Cindy said angrily. "I know this must be hard on your pride, but a better man has taken me from you. I hoped we could end things amicably. I laughed out loud. Since you didn't want to face the truth, you're on your own now. I've already rented an apartment and moved some of my things there. I'll come back for the rest later. You can stay here until the divorce is finalized. After that, the house will either be sold or you can buy me out. You'll be served with the papers at work on Friday. I moved into my small new place. Loving Cindy as much as I did made it incredibly painful. For the first few days, I could barely get out of bed to use the bathroom or eat. Luckily, it was summer, so I didn't have any obligations. I spent all my time thinking about how to get revenge on them, but nothing came to mind. On the third day, I forced myself to get up, shower, and go grocery shopping. When I returned, I turned on the small TV in my kitchenette. The channel was showing a celebrity gossip show, which immediately caught my attention. Former NFL linebacker Brock Turner and his wife are getting divorced after 3 years. It seems the rumors about Brock being a womanizer are true, as his wife, April, has filed for divorce, citing infidelity. Our reporter spoke with Mr. Turner earlier today. Mr. Turner, is it true that your wife caught you with another woman? Please, Brock said with a sad smile. My wife and I are having a tough time. We're working through a big misunderstanding. We'd appreciate some privacy while we try to fix our marriage. I didn't feel much satisfaction from his response. I hadn't spoken to April since I first told her about her husband's affair with my wife. It seemed incredibly unfair that Brock had ruined my marriage, and now he and April might be working things out. I was filled with anger and sadness again. But when my phone rang, fear joined the mix. Before I could even answer, the caller started speaking. Listen, jerk. I know it was you who took those pictures of me with your cheating wife. Just so you know, I'm living in your house and having a great time with her. And you'd better watch the 6 o'clock news tonight because you're going to be in trouble. I was stunned that Brock had called me. But in the few seconds I had to think, I realized it wouldn't be hard for him to figure out I was the one who took the video. Even though I was scared, I wasn't going to let him see that. Well, you're lucky because Cindy is about to be my ex-wife, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. And if you're living there, I'm guessing you haven't managed to sort out that misunderstanding. Just watch the 6 o'clock news, jerk. You won't be so cocky after that. Then he hung up. I worried about what Brock might do to me and turned on the local news at 6. I didn't find out what Brock's threat was about until about 10 minutes into the broadcast. The news anchor said, Palm Beach County's Superintendent of Schools, Standish Crawford, resigned today to take a job with the Department of Education in Washington. Brock Turner, the deputy superintendent, has been named interim superintendent. However, it's widely believed that he'll be offered the position permanently. A deep fear took hold of me. Now I understood what Brock meant when he said my life was in trouble. Since he was the superintendent and I was just a teacher, he was my boss. Brock could make my job unbearable or even frame me for something to cover up his own mess. I needed to get out from under his control. At first, I thought about quitting and going back to engineering, but the economy was just starting to recover, and I needed a steady income to support myself and pay for my divorce lawyer. Cindy's lawyer was making ridiculous demands. They wanted me to pay $50,000 to buy Cindy's share of the house. The house only had about $20,000 in equity, so asking for $50,000 was absurd. Cindy also wanted me to drop the adultery claim and accused me of hiding money, demanding that I pay for a forensic accountant to look into our finances. Even though her demands were unreasonable, I still needed to pay my lawyer to represent me. Feeling a bit anxious, I remembered that April had mentioned the college where she worked was looking for adjunct instructors. I quickly called their human resources department to ask about it. They told me to apply online. To cut a long story short, after reviewing my credentials, they hired me to teach algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus. I got a 1-year contract that paid about 80% of what I earned as a high school teacher. I found teaching at the college level much more fulfilling than high school teaching. In high school, I was always trying to come up with new ways to keep students engaged. But in college, most students genuinely wanted to learn, and if I made the material interesting, they were excited. 2 weeks into the job, I ran into April in the cafeteria. She seemed just as happy to see me as I was to see her. We had lunch together and caught up on each other's lives. April told me that Brock was fighting the divorce and dragging it out. He had even asked for sole custody of Tiffany. But the video of him with my wife while he was supposed to be caring for his daughter convinced the judge that he wasn't fit to have full custody. Still, according to April, the divorce was dragging on forever. I explained that my own divorce had taken longer than I expected, but it finally seemed to be wrapping up. I can't believe I fell for all of Brock's lies. April said as she pushed her half-finished sandwich away. I heard the rumors, but Brock has a way of making everything he says sound so convincing. He must be a smooth talker because he managed to convince my wife to cheat, I said sadly. Cindy always said people should learn something new every day. That's one lesson I could have done without. I'm so sorry this happened to you, Todd, April said, taking my hand. You're one of the nicest people I've ever met. After that first lunch, April and I started having lunch together almost every day, and often met for afternoon coffee. This led to dinners and other outings. I was developing feelings for April, but I didn't want to risk ruining our friendship. Still, I wanted more. So when the circus came to town, I decided to ask her out. The circus is in town this weekend, I mentioned one day at lunch. I was planning to take Tiffany, but she can be a lot to handle, April said with a sigh. She's still confused about why her dad doesn't want to see her. He told me that if I went through with the divorce, he'd pay child support but wouldn't be involved with Tiffany. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Brock is a complete jerk, I said with a hint of anger, but then smiled. Anyway, if you'd like to go to the circus, I'm sure between us we can manage a 4-year-old. The day at the circus was fantastic. Besides the circus, there was also a small fair going on. By the end of the day, April was holding one of my hands, and Tiffany was holding onto the other. Tiffany was also hugging a stuffed unicorn I'd won for her. When we got to their house, I walked them to the door and tried to kiss April on the cheek, but she pulled me in and kissed me on the lips. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her back. As we pulled away, I felt Tiffany tugging on my pants. I want a kiss too, Tiffany said, reaching her free arm towards me. I picked her up and kissed her on both cheeks. Thank you for letting me come with you and your mommy, and thank you for being such a good girl today. Tiffany smiled widely at the compliment, and just as I was about to put her down, April asked, Would you like to stay for dinner? It's nothing fancy. I was just going to make Tiffany's favorite, pagettis. I love pagettis, I said, lifting Tiffany back onto my hip. And I'd love to have dinner with you two lovely ladies. Tiffany did a pretty good job of keeping the tomato sauce mostly on her face and hands. I laughed each time she slurped another strand of spaghetti. While April cleaned Tiffany's face, I cleaned her hands. At one point, Tiffany grabbed my hand and placed it next to hers, then asked, Why is my skin dark and yours isn't? I glanced at April, who looked amused, then answered, Because it makes you and your mommy much prettier than me. You're silly, Tiffany giggled. Boys aren't pretty, they're handsome. Do you think I'm handsome? Yes, and mommy thinks so too. All right, young lady, that's enough, April said quickly. It's time for your bath and bedtime story. After her bath, Tiffany asked if I'd read her a story, and I happily agreed. I ended up reading her 2 stories, using different voices for all the characters. Tiffany loved it, but wouldn't settle down until I kissed her goodnight. After Tiffany fell asleep, April and I sat on the couch, sipping wine and chatting about teaching. Suddenly, April set her glass down, took mine from me, and placed it aside. Then she leaned in and gave me a passionate kiss. I was amazed that this beautiful woman was kissing me. As I often thought to myself, she was one of the most stunning women I had ever seen. We need to move this to my bedroom, she said. April whispered, Please be gentle. Brock was so big that it sometimes hurt. So I eased myself inside her slowly until I was fully in. Oh God, that feels amazing, April said loudly. You fit perfectly. After that night, April and I grew very close, but we decided not to live together until our divorces were finalized. My divorce was settled first, and I was relieved when the final court date arrived. I was in the courtroom when Cindy walked in with Brock. Cindy gave me a smug smile while clinging to Brock's arm. He smirked at me the whole time, especially after he kissed her before sitting down. I had asked April to stay away because I suspected Brock would be there. The divorce proceedings were uneventful. The judge just asked if both lawyers were satisfied, and when they said yes, he hit the gavel, and it was over. April's divorce took nearly 3 more months to finalize. During that time, April and I both completed our PhDs. Shortly after, April landed a job as an associate professor. I didn't get a professorship, but I was offered a 2-year teaching contract, which was unusual since the college had only offered 1-year contracts before. This was because my classes were so popular that each now had a waiting list. I also agreed to teach an extra pre-calculus class due to the high number of students wanting to enroll. I was now earning about 25% more than I did as a high school teacher and was promised an associate professorship in the near future. Things were going better than I expected. But we hit a rough patch when I had to attend a 3-day seminar in Atlanta. The sessions were all day with only brief breaks every hour, and there were group study sessions that often went late into the evening. By the time each day ended, I was exhausted and collapsed into bed, only to start again the next day. I had explained the schedule to April, so she understood. However, Tiffany didn't understand where I had gone or why I hadn't called. When I finally got back, Tiffany practically jumped on me as soon as I walked in. She was crying because I had left her. I tried to explain where I had been, but she didn't calm down until I gave her the pink stuffed dragon. One of her favorite books was Rainbow Dragons, and her favorite dragon in the story was the pink one named Pinky. As soon as I gave her the dragon, she squealed with joy and covered my face with kisses. Once Tiffany had calmed down, we sat down for dinner. Kids say the funniest things. Tiffany looked at me and asked, "Why don't you live here? I want you to be my daddy." "Well," I said, glancing at April, who was smiling, "I'd love to be your daddy, but I'm not sure what your mommy would think about that." April, still smiling, said, "Her mommy would be thrilled if you became Tiffany's daddy. But there's a catch. You'd have to be my husband first." "Really? You'd marry me?" I asked, surprised. "I thought you'd never ask," April replied with a giggle. We had a simple wedding with just a few friends, my dad and April's mom. My mother had passed away when I was 9, and April's dad had died when she was 15. I was as happy as I could be. Even though Cindy left me for a former NFL player, I felt like I'd ended up with the best. Cindy might have been with someone famous, but I was now married to the most beautiful woman I knew, and she came with a wonderful little daughter, whom I loved as if she were my own. Throughout the divorce, Brock kept bothering April, showing how badly he wanted her back. He would alternate between begging and making subtle threats. However, he never did anything that could get him in legal trouble. He was still living with Cindy, and from what I heard, she was very happy. I almost felt sorry for her, knowing that eventually Brock would reveal his true self. When Cindy betrayed me, I was heartbroken and furious. I was so focused on getting revenge on both of them that it consumed my thoughts. But as I started to build a relationship with April, my anger faded, and the desire for revenge disappeared. Yet, it seemed that fate had a plan for me to get my revenge anyway. Soon after we got married, April and I decided to sell our house and buy a new one closer to the college. We decided to handle the sale ourselves and got a buyer quickly. However, since Brock's name was still on the deed, he needed to sign the sale contract. April called him, and at first he was happy to hear from her. But his attitude quickly changed from happy to nasty. When April told him she wanted to sell the house to move closer to the college, he refused to sign. He was being his usual jerk self. April was ready for this and reminded Brock that their divorce agreement required him to buy her out if he didn't want to sell. This made him very angry, and he hung up on her. However, the next day he called back and agreed to sign the contract. At the closing, April asked Brock if he wanted anything from the house. He said he didn't want anything and that it was her problem to clear everything out. Clearing out the house was a huge job. We saved the basement for last, and that's when I discovered something valuable. April brought up a box full of random items. At the bottom of the box was an old laptop that had belonged to Brock. April said he had bought a new laptop about a year and a half after he became principal of West Jupiter High School, so she thought he had thrown out the old one. She asked if I could fix the laptop for Tiffany to use. I told her I could try as long as it still worked. That night, after recharging the battery, I was surprised to find the laptop not only worked, but still had files on it. I originally planned to just reformat the laptop, but then I decided to check the files first to see if there were any pictures of Tiffany or April that they might want to keep. What I discovered went beyond just finding ordinary mistakes and revealed that Brock was not just an ordinary idiot, but a top-tier one. Yes, there were some photos and videos of April and Tiffany, but the majority of the files were of without-clothes women, with Brock having closeness with them. Each video or photo had a description explaining the duration of the affair and Brock's rating of each woman. While I didn't recognize most of the women, I did identify 5 of them. One was the wife of a Dallas quarterback, a famous model. I remembered that shortly after their encounter, the couple divorced and Brock got traded. Now I understood why. The other 4 women were teachers at West Jupiter High School, 2 of whom were married. Cindy was one of those married teachers. It was clear that Brock was involved with all these teachers around the same time. There were several photos and 2 videos of my ex-wife. The new videos were even more shocking than the one I had recorded. I couldn't believe how my once loving wife had turned into such a promiscuous person. But what Brock wrote about Cindy made me laugh. He praised her skills, but complained she was too clingy because she kept asking him to get her pregnant. He even considered having a child with her just to spite her husband. I was about to delete the files, but then I saw this as an opportunity for some revenge. I copied all the explicit content to a flash drive and continued exploring the laptop. What I found next made Brock look like the biggest idiot ever. He had left all his financial records on the computer. I couldn't believe it. Brock had left detailed financial statements with all his accounts, account numbers, and passcodes. He had lied about his assets during the divorce. He had accounts in the Cayman Islands and California that he hadn't disclosed in court. After checking out the rest of the folders, I called April over. I first showed her the photos of the women Brock had been involved with, and then I showed her his financial records. I wasn't sure which made her more upset, the women or the hidden money. Ultimately, I think it was the women. I discovered that Brock had slept with her maid of honor, all her bridesmaids, and even her cousin. Things moved quickly after that. April had Brock brought back to court for hiding assets from their marriage. Although he could have been jailed, the judge ended up giving April 65% of the concealed assets. A good portion of this extra money was put into a college fund for Tiffany, and another part was used for a down payment on a house just 2 blocks from the college. Since my divorce, I had been living in a small apartment with minimal expenses. With my savings and the money from my divorce, I was able to match April's down payment. I hadn't figured out what to do with Brock's top 10 list of affairs, but I kept the flash drive with me while I decided. It might have stayed there if not for what happened at a college fair at the West Palm Beach Convention Center. I had been invited to speak at the fair, and April had taken a class off to join me. The fair had about 40 colleges and universities setting up booths, and high school seniors from nearby schools came to talk to the representatives. There were also seminars on how to create a strong college application, choose a major, and succeed in college. While I was sitting with the college representative, I heard the voice of someone I loathed the most. Brock Turner. "Look here, Cindy," Brock said with a smug grin. "It's your pathetic ex-husband." "That's amusing, Brock," I said with a forced smile. "Because that's exactly what your ex-wife says about you." "You're such a jerk, Todd," Brock said, his face turning red. "I'm tempted to teach you a lesson about respecting your betters." "Just ignore him, Brock," Cindy said, holding his arm tightly. "He's not worth your time. Don't stoop to his level." Brock looked at Cindy and then at me with a nasty grin. He leaned in and kissed Cindy deeply. She melted into his kiss. When they pulled away, Brock gave me a smug look. That settled it for me. As they turned to leave, I called out to Cindy, "Cindy, I found some pictures of you on the computer. I thought you might want them. You always said people should learn something new every day." She took the flash drive with a mumbling, "Thank you." I didn't realize that April had seen everything and walked over to me right then. She hugged me and gave me a quick kiss. "Sorry I was gone for so long, dear." "What the hell?" Brock said, looking shocked. His face turned bright red when he noticed April's pregnant belly. "Oh, hi, Brock," she said sweetly. "Were you catching up with my husband?" Brock took a step toward me, but stopped when he saw a security guard passing by. He walked away with Cindy, but kept glancing back a few times, looking unsettled. That night, April and I were in bed, and I was putting lotion on her stomach. We were only half listening to the news until the newscaster started a new report. This evening, officers responded to a call at the residence of School Superintendent Brock Turner involving an alleged domestic issues situation. We don't have many details yet, but Mr. Turner seemed to have a non-life-threatening knife wound. Right now, we know he's in the hospital, and Cindy Albee has been taken to county jail. Turning to April with a grin, I remarked, "Looks like Cindy learned something new today."